So this question that Meno asks at 80D is, let's refer to it as Meno's paradox. It's a general term by which people refer to this question. You've got to think about this. Is Meno's question here a legitimate question? Is it a real problem that he's pointing out? Socrates, at least on the surface, doesn't seem to think so. He responds at 80E, he says, I know what you want to say, Meno. Do you realize what a debater's argument you were bringing up? That is, it's simply a debater's argument. It's simply a trick. It's simply a ploy in argument to gain an advantage. And what Socrates seems to dismiss right away is that Meno has pointed out a fundamental flaw in his method. Right? Now, it's that question, I think, that we need to think about for this class. And we need to get straight, each one of us for ourselves, in terms of how strong a point Meno is actually making. Is Meno simply trying to trick Socrates, trying to knock him off balance, or has he pointed out a legitimate problem in inquiry? Because what he said basically is that inquiry is impossible, right? That is, inquiry understood as the attempt to understand something, the attempt to know something. He has said, well, you either know something or you don't know something. If you know it, there's no reason to look for it. If you don't know it, it's impossible to find it. Why? Because you won't know how to look for it, because you know nothing about it. And even if by chance you do stumble upon it in the course of your inquiry, you won't be able to recognize it as the thing you were looking for, because you won't know what it looks like. You won't know what it is. You won't be able to identify it if you stumble upon it. How serious a problem is this for the kind of thing that Socrates wants to do? Socrates wants to gain knowledge about things like virtue, and if we look at the other dialogues, lots of other things. What is the nature of beauty? What is the nature of knowledge? What is the nature of particular virtue like justice? If he starts out by admitting his own ignorance about these things, and at least in our translation going so far in the beginning of the dialogue as to say that he is completely ignorant about virtue, how will he ever find what he's looking for, according to the points that Meno brings up? If we look at 80E and look at Socrates' immediate response to what Meno has to say, he says, I know what you want to say, Meno. Do you realize what a debater's argument you are bringing up? I don't know how to take that either. Is Socrates really so immediately dismissing the importance of what Meno has said in his objection, calling it a mere debater's argument, as if, well, I've heard this sort of thing before, about the impossibility of inquiry, and it's just a trick. It's a ploy, rather than a serious philosophical objection. And then he restates what Meno says in slightly different form, that a man cannot search either for what he knows or for what he does not know. He cannot search for what he knows, since he knows it, there is no need to search, nor for what he does not know, for he does not know what to look for. Does that argument not seem sound to you, Socrates? That seems to be an honest question. Well, Meno says, well, okay, you've kind of changed what I said a little bit, but the essence of it is still there. Doesn't that seem sound? Isn't that an important objection? Socrates says, not to me. Meno, can you tell me why? Okay, well, here we are in the second part of the dialogue. Let's say that Meno's paradox, the question, the objection about inquiry, the paradox of inquiry. How can you know what you're looking for? How can you look for something that you don't already know? And let's say that completes the first section of the dialogue. And here we are into the second section where things take quite an interesting turn. What is the theme here in the second part of the dialogue, which has to do with Socrates' encounter with the slave boy? It is a response, obviously, to Meno's paradox about inquiry of a certain sort, and it's an attempt to dispel that objection and to prove that inquiry is possible, that it is fruitful, that it's possible to go from ignorance about something to knowledge about something, and that the points about inquiry that Meno has made in his objection really don't apply. That is, that inquiry is possible. But how so? I mean, that is, what is Socrates' response, philosophical response to the paradox of inquiry? Well, a very famous doctrine, let's say, of Plato is introduced in this dialogue, and that is that knowledge, all knowledge, apparently, it doesn't make any distinctions between type of knowledge in my reading, that all knowledge is actually recollection. That is, that when we come to know something, it's not as if we somehow have to find that knowledge in some source external to ourselves. The process of coming to know something is really the process of coming to remember something. And speaking in slightly metaphorical terms, maybe more than slightly, coming to remember something that we already have inside of us, but in a forgotten form. We've all had this experience. It is part of a fundamental experience of being a conscious being, of forgetting and remembering, of not being able to remember a name or a certain fact or anything, and then being able to recover it. And the mysterious nature of that is really, quite important, I guess. I mean, if you can't recall something to mind, and then you can, well, where was that thing when you couldn't recall it, and how did you recover it? Was it inside you in some sense? Well, I guess so. What Socrates seems to be claiming, what Socrates is claiming in the second part of the Meno, is that all knowledge is like that. And at first he describes this in a religious form. Right? He says, I have heard wise men and women talk about divine matters, priests and priestesses, etc. This is on page 14, around 81d, where he describes it. He says, as the soul is immortal, has been born often, and has seen all things, here and in the underworld, there is nothing which it has not learned. So it is in no way surprising that it can recollect the things it knew before, both about virtue and other things. As the whole of nature is akin, and the soul has learned everything, nothing prevents a man, after recalling one thing only, a process men call learning, discovering everything else for himself, if he is brave and does not tire of the search. For searching and learning are, as a whole, recollection. We must therefore not believe that debater's argument, for it would make us idle, and faint-hearted men like to hear it, whereas my argument makes them energetic and keen on the search. I trust that this is true, and I want to inquire along with you into the nature of virtue. Well, that response, that redescription of what it means to know something, what it means to learn something, that is to redescribe things in terms of remembering and recollection rather than learnings, that's important. I mean, it explains what Socrates means, I believe, I guess, by knowledge is recollection. But it complicates matters by what Socrates says at the end. That is, that what is he saying to Meno? That your argument, that inquiry is impossible, this will make us idle. This will make us lazy. It's a lazy argument. And faint-hearted men like to hear it. That is, we'll just despair about the possibilities of knowledge and doing philosophy. Whereas he says, my argument makes them energetic and keen on the search. I trust. We'll look at the Greek to see if that's a good translation. I trust, he says, that this is true. So, we'll look at his demonstration with the slave boy. But one of the things you want to ask ourselves is Socrates' objection to Meno's paradox on the basis of its philosophical worth? That is this a good or bad objection about the possibility of inquiry? Or is his objection to it ethical and practical? That is, could he be saying that what Meno has objected is actually true, but it's bad to believe it because it will make us lazy and idle? And could he be saying that what he is saying about knowledge being a recollection may not be true, but it will make us better because it will encourage us to keep on inquiring into things, that's a question we want to think about.